So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our keynote for today, Mr. Jim Flagging. Jim is currently a managing partner at Synergy Partners, an advisory firm focused solely on cybersecurity. Jim currently serves on the board of directors of several technology companies, including SailPoint, Tripwire, and Adaptive Mobile. Prior to starting Synergy Partners, Jim was a managing partner at the Chertoff Group, where he advised both enterprises and investors on their growth plans and investment strategies. Additionally, Jim has served as the CEO of cybersecurity and data management companies in the past, and we're very fortunate to have him here today. So let's give Jim a warm round of applause and welcome him.
Okay, let's see if I can manage both of these at the same time. Okay, let's go ahead and get to the first one, huh? Oh, already did it wrong. Good morning, everybody. Do you have any basketball fans in the audience? Yeah. Woo! Any Warriors fans? Yeah. All right. Oh, okay, conflict at the start. I've been a Warriors season ticket holder since 1989. You can call that commitment or insanity, probably a little bit of both. I calculated the other day that I've sat through over 500 losses, and there were years when you couldn't get a friend or a date. It was just really hard and lonely being a Warriors fan. But times have changed, haven't they, right? So the Warriors are really, really good. And a key person behind that is not the person on that page in front of you. It's a guy named Steve Kerr. So Steve Kerr joined the Warriors about 3-4 years ago, and it was deemed to be somewhat of a risky hire. He had never coached before, and he was inheriting quite a good team. So as fans, we were really curious about this guy. And he said, I've got 4 key management strategies that if we follow these, we're going to be wildly successful. And the first one was joy. Joy? Are you kidding me? Joy is a management strategy? And he went on to talk about compassion and mindfulness and competition. And I think there's a lot of great lessons that any business leader can get from Steve Kerr. Now, I'm a hoops junkie, but this is not going to be the topic of today's talk. But I will talk about another topic that I'm passionate about, and that's security in the boardroom. And why does that matter, particularly for the companies coming through the program? It seems pretty obvious, right? If you can connect with things that matter in the boardroom, from both a capability and a positioning point of view, you're going to be more likely to win. You're going to be more likely to grow your business. And that leads me to a quote from another sort of basketball luminary. Does anybody know who Bobby Knight is? All right, so Bobby Knight, probably one of the greatest coaches in college. Indiana was known for what? A really fiery temper. So imagine this big guy standing over you, probably screaming to his team, going, if you want to win, you have to prepare to win, not play, prepare to win. And I love that quote, which kind of goes over your head the first time, because what he's saying is the little things make the difference between being in the league and being the best in the league. And I think back to what we're here to do today and in this program is do the little things that can separate you from the rest and build a rapidly growing and a profitable business. And so those are some of the sort of things that I want to focus on today, particularly for the entrepreneurs in the room. And one of the first questions is security a boardroom priority, and how do we make it one? Now, a few years ago, the answer to that question was pretty darn simple. No, it's not. But things have changed, and Nate was talking about that a little bit earlier. Last year with Petya and WannaCry, there's a couple very interesting things that came from that. Merck, FedEx, and several others had to make material disclosures for a change in their outlook for the year in revenue and profitability. That gets investors' attention. Then towards the end of the year in the Equifax hack, and then really the poor job management did afterwards, including some insider trading that went on, that woke up the folks at the SEC. And in the middle of February of this year, the SEC came out and issued some pretty strong language that said for directors at public companies, you are accountable to ensure that you're both aware and disclose cyber breaches. And as directors, that's beginning to get people's attention. Then a month later, one of the SEC directors came out, this is the end of March, and sort of took it one step further. He said that, quote, cybersecurity is the top corporate governance issue today, hard stop. And that we're going to do more from the SEC. We're going to put real teeth in requirements for directors around disclosure, insider trading, and internal controls. That's pretty big, and I can tell you from personal experience, that's got attention that we're going, what do we need to do? So with those kind of tailwinds, you would think the time is beginning to be right that we're going to get more attention for this topic at the boardroom. Now I'd like to sort of back up the bus a little bit and sort of frame, well, what does management do vis-a-vis boards, and what do boards really care about? So to be clear, management runs the business. They lead and run operations. And boards generally consist of people from three groups: the owners of the business, the management team, and then outside directors. And boards care about a lot of things, but I think you can net it down to three: risk management, value creation, and metrics. And in risk management, that means financial risk, operational risk, reputational risk. That one has certainly been in the news in the last several months. And then, yes, cyber risk. And when it comes to risk, the way that we look at it is the following: which we can eliminate, which we can mitigate, which we can accept, and then what we will transfer through insurance. And when it comes to value creation, that's fun, right? That's that stew. It's that mix of the market opportunity, the team, the strategy, and then, of course, execution. And then execution leads to the last thing, and that's metrics. Now, any dumb fool can measure things. That's not really that tricky and interesting. It takes a real art to know what to measure. What is the short list of things that really matter? And for any growth stage company, it's about growth. Growth is like water, it's oxygen. And you've gotta grow. And I think that as young companies, what's really key is that we focus on the short-term elements of growth, leads and pipeline and leading to closure, but also the long-term, that Stephen Covey thing, start with the end in mind. And I'm going to hit on that theme as we continue through. Now, when talking to senior executives about the topic of cybersecurity, sometimes the eyes glaze over. And so I thought, we got to come up with a better way to do this and develop something that works for me and it works for some others who have tried it, is to enter into the discussion with something called the 3 T's of the digital economy, and that's technology, threat, and trust. And why is that? These are 3 big interrelated ideas that together have a profound impact on strategy, on policy, and on public opinion. So I would ask that everybody, when you leave here today, at least be aware of the 3 T's, but perhaps do more. If you're leading a business, I'd like you to think about what is your business doing to leverage that first one, and its technology, to better react to the second one, and that's threat, and then to shape the third one, and that's trust. So let's take a double click as we look through that, and it starts with technology. Now, maybe because I've lived in Silicon Valley too long, I'm kind of breathing the exhaust here, but it seems pretty clear to me that we are living in the golden age of innovation. I mean, there's never been anything like it. And on that diagram on the right, you could put a bunch of different things, but cloud, mobility, AI, open source, social media. Now we're talking about DLTs and blockchain. It really is a great time, and it's a challenging time if you're leading a business. But it seems clear that now is an imperative that you've got to re-examine how we deliver goods and services, how we interact with our customers and our stakeholders, and in some cases examine, do we still have a business? I mean, consider, do you want to be Blockbuster or Netflix? That proud owner of a New York City taxi medallion, remember when those were going for $250,000 each? Or an early investor in Uber? You see, it's kind of clear. The winners are going to be those who leverage technology to create lasting competitive advantage. But this golden age, it has a dark side. You see, it's enabled a new class of bad actors who are taking advantages of these new platforms because security has not been built in. It's been bolted on after the fact, okay? And this this event is taking the effect of cyber breaches, which if you just follow the line, as we all know, way, way past the days when people did this for fun or for kicks or for embarrassment or even simply to steal information and for financial gain. We're at the onset of things that look really, really scary. Is that it could be to destroy the earnings or the overall fabric of a company, or perhaps even undermine an entire sector like the electric grid or the water system and things like that. So it requires us to think about this problem in a new and different way if you're in the government, if you're leading an enterprise. Now, one of the effects of threat, sadly, is an erosion of trust. And I've heard people say that we're living in the age of uncertainty. Citizens don't trust government, consumers don't trust business, government doesn't seem to trust anybody. And we all know how important trust is for any relationship. So as a leader, you can think about what can we do to enhance trust, be seen as a good stakeholder. There's an area for advantage if we can do that. So it's an introduction to the 3 T's. Now, in 2017, when I was at the Chertoff Group, my team decided to really dig into this question and really understand what's going on with security in the boardroom. And we had interviews with well over 100 leaders, and we had senior people in the firm conduct the interviews, each over an hour long. 40% of the people were responding as a board director. The balance was predominantly C-levels, not technologists, although we did have some CISOs and CIOs in there. Public companies, private companies, Europe, North America, Asia-Pac, Latin America, and across a number of industries. So let's take a look at some of the things that we found. Maybe not surprising is that we found a consistent and deep cyber knowledge gap. And this wasn't us evaluating or quizzing people. It's what people said, hey, I don't know enough about this. And the more senior people got, the less prepared they felt to have a coherent conversation on the topic. And some of the quotes were a little bit chilling. Again, maybe not surprising. You know, hey, we're kicking the can down the road. We're getting desensitized to this. And we don't really feel like there's a good source to turn to, either from the media or the management consultancies. So we're looking for better answers. Now, as we parse that data a little bit more closely, we saw a tale of 2 cities, a tale of 2 cyber cities. And on the left was the good news, if you will, maybe promising. And this was Fortune 500, obviously public, companies in what would be called critical sectors, critical infrastructure, finance, telecom, technology, healthcare. And there, the directors said, yeah, we've been talking about cyber at the board for years. And it's in the context of a risk management discussion. And some even said, we've moved beyond risk, and it's now in a discussion of business continuity. And said, well, how do you folks learn? How do you get smart on cyber? And they generally said 2 answers, which were a little bit surprising. The first, they said, we learn from just being on other boards. So we talk to a peer group, we get a little bit kind of at each board, and we bring that to the table. The second thing is, we have good CISOs, and we really like it when they share stories that are in context. This is something that impacts our industry. This is something that will impact us. And it seems natural, right? Sometimes it's easier to grok something new with a good, colorful story about it. And that's a bit of advice I have, I think, when you're presenting up the line, particularly to CISOs presenting to boards, be careful about too many metrics. Now, the bad news, although I would call it the opportunity, is everybody else. And this was companies outside the US, smaller companies, even public companies in non-critical sectors. And there they said almost universally, cyber's never on the agenda. And I can vouch for that on the boards that I've been on. We had to force it on the agenda. And people said, if it's ever on the agenda, it's in response to a breach. And it's like, how quickly can we get this off and move on? I thought another correlation that I didn't put on the chart is that very few of these directors could name their CISO or even knew if they had one. So interesting facts there. So coming out of this, I thought there's an opportunity to do more. And what if a lot of the focus seems to be on CISOs, how to prepare to the board, how to do this, but what about for board directors? How do you really help them figure out what their job is in cyber? And so developed this thing called the Cyber Blueprint for Board Directors. And it said, It's a 7-point model broken into 3 categories. And on the one on the left is things that management leads. And this is really the fundamentals of a risk management program. The first is a core or a foundation, then measurement and response. The second is categories that the board is really well suited to lead, not own, lead. And that's in culture and people. And then the final is one that's more of a shared responsibility, and we'll dig into this, about externalities and foresight. And it's really about awareness overall. So if we click into that and look at some of the core questions in each area, the first one is simple. What are we trying to achieve? What is the purpose of our cyber risk program? Do we want to be best in class? Do we want to be top quintile? Do we want to tie it to other financial or operating metrics? What are we trying to achieve? Let's be clear on that. Have we prioritized our risks? Do we know what our crown jewels are? And are we using the right governing model to chart down this path? And then in the second, in measurement, I think there's a lot of questions behind it, but the most important is, do we know what success looks like, right? That end in mind. Where are we going? And then do we have the proper controls in place that are widely understood, uniformly measured, that can chart that course? And then finally, in response, the first question is, can we execute? Can we do this? Can management actually execute and make it happen? And then have we tested this program and assumptions so it's not a hope? We have a reason to believe in the fact that we can do it. Then on culture, do you remember those Rob Lowe ads where it said, like, don't be like this me? I love those ads. First, Rob Lowe, pretty cool guy. And I'd say when we talk to companies, if the person who cares most about cyber in your business is the CISO, don't be like that me. You don't want that. That's bad. This needs to be on the top 5 of the CEO. You need a CEO-led culture that appreciates cyber and privacy, because when that happens, the following other things happen. You begin to recognize things like good cyber hygiene in recognition or other ways of doing it. You begin to weave it into your value creation objectives. If you're going to go spend $500 million on a digital transformation effort, launch up a new data center, switch to a new ERP platform, the people who are accountable for that, the business unit heads, should have security objectives written right in at the core. That's not just those people down the hall in the security organization. Then in people, some of the things are, ultimately, do we have confidence in the person that's leading this program? And then from a training point of view, do we have effective training? Is it properly funded? Because people are so scarce and hard to get, do we have these people with the right pay and incentive plans? Now, the area over on the right, many small companies say, this isn't me, but I would ask you to think about this, is the externalities. Are you aware of and participating in the regulations and policies that are coming your way? GDPR is one example, and I'm looking through out there, I can see that some of the entrepreneurs are zoned in on that. Are you aware of things in current events that could impact the systemic risk to your company? And then, of course, third-party and supplier risks. Anybody who sat on an audit committee knows that that's a very present topic for your advisors right now. And then on foresight, this is really, hey, do we have a culture where we can see around corners, an appreciation for knowing what we don't know? And then do we have real partners, not vendors, but a few partners who can take us on this journey? Because this is a really hard topic for most firms to staff and manage on their own. So that's a little bit of the blueprint, and hopefully that's helpful as you're thinking about the ways that boards may be looking at this issue. So kind of taken to the next stage here, and sort of the last module of this talk, is if you think about those 3 T's and you think about technology, your customers are on a journey, and they're on a journey to create competitive advantage. Where does security fit in? And I thought a way that you might be helpful is, let's look at past, present, and future, some of the macro IT issues that perhaps will give you some insights into how to think about where your company may fit in. So these are a little busy, but if we look at the customer environment from yesterday, and you follow with me from the right side, at the C-suite level, security, no one cared. If you were outside of a large business, a very large company or government, it just wasn't really a C-suite issue. The compute environment was largely on-prem or in a private cloud. One of the things that we were dealing with was mobility, really, the onset of BYOD and connecting people into our enterprise. For the security jocks, we all lived in this world of strong walls, network security, keep the bad guys out. And what we did, and I led a company that did this, is we analyzed logs, we correlated events, and then we wrote signatures to those threats to prevent that bad thing from happening. Some important building blocks around data security and identity weren't really in the conversation. Identity was still more of a help desk issue, password reset. Encryption was limited maybe into financial systems and parts of the intelligence community. We really didn't have widespread use of encryption. And compliance, we were kind of dealing with Rev 1.0 and the different regimes from SOX, PCI, and HIPAA, but it was driving IT spend. Now, fast forward to today, things look a lot different, don't they? As we're talking about, the executive suite is aware of security, see it as a business risk. They may not totally get it yet, but that's coming. And the cloud really is changing, quote, everything. We're still largely centralized compute, but it's centralized with nodes of compute as we put key applications like mail, CRM, HR, and even security and IT into the cloud. Now, from a security point of view, this means a couple things have fundamentally changed. This whole metaphor of keep the bad guys out, that's tostada. We're done with that. There's now a recognition that the bad actors are in the network, and they're actually look like and try to behave like valid users. They compromise credentials, they act like valid users. So the ball has shifted from a prevention to a focus on detection, looking for anomalies in behavior and then putting the proper controls or next steps around that. And that you could argue that now the security perimeter is identity. It's identity. And identities are more than people. They're things, they're robotic processes. And we're seeing much more widespread use of encryption and other data security techniques because people say, that's the crown jewel. I want to make sure that's secure at risk and while it's in movement. And then compliance sure has changed. It's compliance/privacy. As regimes like GDPR take effect and citizens are going to start to stand up and say, hey, I want my right to be forgotten. And if you don't do it, I want my regulators to have financial teeth to go after the bad companies who don't enforce it. And we're seeing similar things kick in Singapore, Australia. The Chinese have their own interesting way of doing things. But we're going to see more of these kind of citizen-focused compliance regimes. And then where is this heading? So a couple things that I think are interesting to consider is, first, at the C-suite level, boards and CEOs will get this. This will become a competency in the boardroom, and it will be a risk that they will manage on an equal par with others. If you just look at those comments from the SEC and others, you'd be crazy to not enter down that path. But I think the leading organizations will do one step more, is that they're going to begin to understand security and privacy as a source of value creation, and that's going to change how they invest and what percent of their overall IT investment goes into these technologies. Now, I think the biggest change that we're heading to is, for those of you old enough will remember this, we're heading back to distributed computing. It's not going to be centralized compute, it's distributed. Some of the tectonic shifts that are driving that include things like IoT, hundreds of billions of chatty things, some intelligent, some not, but they're data generating things. AI, the ability to do very intelligent analysis and to do that on the edge, and there's companies that are pioneering that. The ability to use peer-to-peer communications, things like blockchain and other DLTs, are all going to drive us to more communication at the edge. Now, from a security management point of view, I think there's going to be, you got to think about this and go, this is still too damn hard for most companies, and the threats are only going to get harder. So it seems that security has to get delivered more as a utility. And it's got to be delivered from the infrastructure you get from a Google or an Amazon or others. It's got to be delivered from the applications that you rely on to run your business or the payment systems that you use to conduct your financial business. And then we're going to see far more interesting MSSPs. That's a mouthful, but that stands for Managed Security Services Provider. People who can do this from the cloud. And some of the things we'll begin to hear about is, with regard to identity, is a zero trust environment. You can't trust an entity until you've proven that they are to be trusted. And that's going to have even more widespread use of data security, tokenization, encryption, and greater use of certificates for all these devices on the edge. So the final pit here really isn't about compliance. It's maybe more of a policy prediction. Is, you know, in the last, 2-3 months, tariffs and trade wars are really in the news. I think what we're going to find in the news in a couple of years is data wars. And countries are going to use privacy regimes as a central part of their economic policy to sort of bend agreements because they're going to realize that data is a critical asset and they don't want to see it siphoned off and sort of monetized just by some large US companies. We're going to begin to see some interesting dynamics around that. So, kind of in conclusion, if we come back to that quote, actually let me hit this. I was going to blow by this one. If I have the one chart that I like to use in the boardroom, it's this. And it's a way to talk to directors and kick a conversation off. It starts with the 3 T's on the left: technology, threat, and trust. How are we as a firm looking at this, leveraging it, reacting to it, shaping it? And can we answer key questions like, who has access to data? What are they doing? How is it used? Are we safe? Are we good stewards of information? And if we can check, I would bet you have a correlation to growth. You have a correlation that we're more resilient to risk. We probably have an operation that's running more efficiently. And ultimately, it's going to be innovative and it's going to be longer-term profitability. Those are good things. So if I was an entrepreneur today, I'd be thinking about some of these messages and capabilities and how do I align my firm around that. So in conclusion, we talked out front about hoops, which I'm a massive hoops fanatic. I love to think about basketball and business. And that Bobby Knight quote, rather, prepare to win. Now, it's really key when you're getting a business, it's about growth, isn't it? And businesses can be good about, we got to create MQLs, marketing qualified leads. We got to convert those to SQLs, sale qualified leads. Got to advance them through the pipeline. Got to build growth and revenue. But many times what they forget is the long run. How do you operationalize your exit? How do you operationalize your exit? And I think every firm, you got to think, who are the big brothers that need us? They don't know they need us. And then how do we reverse engineer that into operating plans in year 1, year 2, year 3 of the firm? Because you want to create optionality. And you want to create optionality. So anyway, those are a couple of ideas. Hopefully they're helpful. And we have a few minutes if anybody has questions. But thank you. Warriors in 6.